So what are the 10 best cards in Castle Nathria? Well, I've got some guesses, and you guys had some guesses as well. To kick this video off, I'm actually going to showcase the 10 highest rated cards by the community, utilizing scores from Hearthstone top decks. And these are the 10 cards you guys think are going to be the best. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to show you the 10 cards I think are going to be the best. But coming in at number 10 here is Convincing Disguise, the new 1-mana spell for Shaman. This one is all about evolve effects, transforming a friendly minion into one that costs 2 more, or infusing, transforming all friendly minions instead. So I think people here are envisioning a world where you go pretty wide on the board, and then Convincing Disguise is essentially like a super evolve effect across the entire board. And you know, I do think Evolve Shaman looked pretty solid in the theory crafting. We got absolutely ran over a couple times by some just absurd starts with that deck. And Convincing Disguise actually seemed okay with Baroness Vash by its own, even without infuse. Just the single target sometimes was pretty cool. And then if you do manage to infuse this, of course, the upside, I think, is really, really high on it. So I do think this will be a solid card. I'm not sure Evolve Shaman is going to be like a top tier deck. So I don't know if this is going to stand out as a top 10 card for me. Didn't make my list because I think it'll be inconsistent. It's one of those decks that'll have really big pop off games and also just completely whiff sometimes when it falls behind on board and just get ran over. So I'm not going to give this top 10 honors, but I still think a pretty good card. Moving on here to Solid Alibi for Mage, number 9 for community ratings. This one is the new kind of damage denial spell here for Mage, limiting you to only taking 1 damage at a time. So it's in that vein of like timeouts or ice block sort of cards. Obviously not as universal, not as life-saving. Sometimes you will still be killed after playing a Solid Alibi, which might end up being the downside for this card. I don't know how many decks are going to be willing to commit a spot in their deck list for this one when they might just be able to play like a removal card instead that kind of solves the same sort of problems, or maybe just some straight up life gain instead as well, because there will be certain scenarios where that's going to be better, where you just want to get that proactive life in instead of hoping to line this up on the exact right moment when it may not line up all that well. And any kind of, you know, ping style effects are still going to push right through Solid Alibi with no problem. So for me, I don't know, this one feels a little bit more awkward. I still think a playable card. I think it'll pop into a list here and there, but certainly not one that made it all the way to the top 10 for me like it did for community ratings. Number 8 here is Double Cross, one of the rogue secrets. This one draws you 2 cards when your opponent spends all their mana. And there's actually going to be another rogue secret card popping up here, or I should say secret synergy card among community ratings. I am not quite as sold on the rogue secret package right now. I think there are going to be a lot of lists that are able to cut it. It's okay. I think Double Cross is probably my favorite of the secrets for the record, although I can envision some scenarios where you play this late in a game and you really, really need to draw cards, but because your opponent's sitting on like 8, 9 mana, it's not really much for them to float a mana. You know, it's a small percentage of their total mana expenditure in a turn, so they might be able to deny that Double Cross and deny you that reload you need to finish a game. And that does seem like a real weakness for this one. I think if you play it early, it's probably pretty good, but the later and later it comes down, the worse it is. Plus, it's delayed draw. Sometimes you need card draw that's instant, so you find things to do right away. Whereas this is sitting there passively at the very best, waiting a turn for you to be able to utilize the cards. So even as the secret, like this is my favorite of the secrets, maybe, although the 3/4 stealth is pretty good too. It's still awkward, still going to be checked a little bit. So playable again, you know, it's solid, it's okay, but definitely not top 10 status for me. Next up here is The Light It Burns, coming in at number 7, a new holy spell for priest. This one is kind of a nice little removal card, really efficient removal, I think, because this can both kill small minions as needed if you just need to address your opponent's really early game threats, or sometimes it can kill like big 8/8s, right? Anything symmetrical can die to The Light It Burns, and I think that gives it a lot of utility, just weaving this in later in a game to kill some giant imp that's been buffed by their location, for instance, right? That's fine. You can do that on turn 3. You can do that on turn 7. It's still useful in that scenario. So this card has a lot of flexibility and utility. I think it's a very, very strong tool. That said, actually still didn't make my top 10. I think, you know, there are a lot of really powerful cards that are kind of deck defining and they set up an entire game plan and archetype, and this one doesn't feel like that sort of card to me. So very, very good, very high utility, super strong card. I agree completely. Just not the sort of thing I would necessarily put in the top 10. It sounds like I'm not putting any of these in the top 10 so far. There will be some that I do agree with, just wait. Number 6 though is Erelon, and this card got really, really hyped up in the review season, as did all of the Wild Seed package. And some of you won't know this because I talked about it on stream, but not in video. I almost gave Erlon 3 stars. I ended up bumping it to 4 stars, but it was a very, very close debate in my brain. I think I was swayed a little bit by community perception, to be frank. This always felt to me like it was the most awkward of the Wild Seed cards. I actually like the package pretty well. I think the real issue here for me is the power spike in this card isn't really hitting until turn 7 or 8, and it doesn't feel like the power output's quite high enough for that spike coming so late in the game and on a big delay. So you're kind of having a weak turn 5, turn 6, turn 7 based off this. Now, obviously, you can add other things in on top of the Erlon plays on 6 and 7, but you can do that with any 5-mana card, right? So how much are you investing for a turn 8 payoff with Erlon? 5 mana feels like a pretty big commitment in that case. And I think as you start to get into those mid-game turns, you're looking to do things in Hunter that are like turning the corner, that are really helping you seal the deal, playing gigantic threats. And this is more mediocre threats, sort of, passed out over time as opposed to a big dump, a big high pressure situation. And I think that gives opponents a lot of time to work through it. So as opposed to, getting a nice stag Wild Steed from a 2-drop play on turn 5, where it's still really relevant and really swingy, you're say getting that on turn 8, and you spend a lot more mana to do it as well. So all in all, this still feels like the weakest to me, even after playing it. It felt okay. Again, I think this is a totally fine card. I still think it's pretty solid. I still think there will be decks that run it. I'm not saying Erlon is garbage. I don't think that. I just do not think this is a top 10 card. This feels really more like a middle-of-the-road legendary to me at this stage. Even after playing it, I really wasn't swayed too much. I think Erlon's just going to be okay. So here's that other rogue secret synergy card, the Private Eye. 4 mana 3/4 coming in at the number 5 spot. Battlecry. Cast a secret from your deck, combo, cast 2 instead. And I also thought this card looked really insane upon first glance, right? It's just doing a lot. You're getting a couple cards out of your deck. You're cheating them into play immediately. Like, this is worth a lot of total mana. If you think about it, a pretty interesting tempo card in that regard, just getting so many things happening all at once. That said, there are 2 downsides for this that I feel like are holding it back in hindsight, and having seen some of the Secret Rogue stuff in action as well. Number one, I think the combo is more punishing than you might expect, especially when you want to play this as early as possible. There are plays like Coin, Private Eye that look really interesting, but beyond that, if you don't have that exact scenario, kind of awkward to combo this out. There aren't going to be a lot of clean scenarios to combo a 4-mana card. It's pretty expensive post combo, so that's a little bit of a check there. Also, I'm just not as sold on the secret package as I was initially. I worry the secret package is actually going to feel a tad awkward in hindsight. I don't think Kidnap is going to be that powerful. I just talked about the card draw ones, has some weaknesses for sure. I do still think the 3/4 stealth is really strong. Maybe that's enough to get all these over the hump. But again, I think the secret package is just going to feel solid, not insane. I don't think Private Eye is a strong enough card individually to drive it, even though this still does make a lot of sense. It reads very, very well. It's just in practice, maybe not quite that strong. So here we go, a card I actually have in my top 10. It's Magnifying Glaive, the new Demon Hunter weapon, and this one's all about reloads, because after you attack, you will draw until you have 3 cards. We've seen some of this empty hand synergy stuff in Demon Hunter, where you want to empty your hand and then you reload it really efficiently here with Magnifying Glaive. So this could theoretically be a 3-mana draw 6 very easily in Demon Hunter, if you just are able to dump your hand. And Demon Hunter loves playing aggressively, so that fits really naturally into their gameplay, and they have other ways to discard stuff from their hand and play into this. So all in all, this feels like a really big payoff. The only risk I see with Magnifying Glaive is perhaps other weapons, where you might have another weapon in hand that you can't play because you'll overwrite your Magnifying Glaive, and then you can't get rid of it because you need to attack with Magnifying Glaive to draw your card. So there could be a little bit of an imbalance there, but I don't think that's going to happen often enough or be a big enough downside to really matter, because even if you did get a weapon stuck in hand and Magnifying Glaive only drew you 2 cards, I think that would still be insane. So this card looks like a really great enabler and reload tool for aggressive Demon Hunter strategies, which have proven themselves time and time again, and I think this looks really strong. So next up at the number 3 spot is Kael'thas Sinstrider, and we will be seeing this one again on my list. People expected Kael'thas to be nuts. I think after seeing it in action in the theory crafting, it looks pretty nuts. It enables some really crazy turns. I got on turn 9 Kael'thas Bran Denathrius, and it was like 26 damage or something, right? Just crazy potential, particularly in Druid, I think, with Kael'thas Sinstrider. Now, I do not think this is going to be everywhere. I don't think it's going to be like in every deck, but I think there will be a few decks that use this in really key and really significant game-winning sorts of ways, and that is absolutely worthy of a top 10 spot. I think this will indeed be a very, very powerful card. Maybe not totally broken, but super, super good. Next up here is Planted Evidence for Druid, and although this one may not be as like dramatic of a card, you know, it's not some big crazy game-winning legendary, it's about as good as it gets from a consistency standpoint. I think a lot of decks for Druid will be able to run this successfully, especially with the new nature spell synergies, things like Topior popping up, for instance. This card's just really good. Discovering a spell, already awesome. Just being able to find something in a moment that's perfect for that moment is powerful, but then also it costing less means you can actually cheat some mana and often get 2 nature spells in one to empower any nature spell synergies that you have. So we'll be seeing this one again in my top 10 as well. It's just really hard to argue that this card is incredibly efficient and incredibly consistent. It's going to be good. And then number 1 for the community was the Widowbloom Seedsman. This almost got a 5-star rating. It's insane how consistently this was given 5 stars. Pretty much everybody agrees this card is nuts. And yeah, it just does so many things that Druid wants to do because they love ramp. They love drawing nature spells, especially with things like Topior, like we just talked about. And the fact that you're also getting a little body with this is a nice bonus that probably wasn't even totally necessary, but it just makes this card feel like it's been pushed to the extreme. It's perfect for what Druids are trying to do. It's not quite as good of a mana fit technically into things like Nourish, because you're kind of going to 6 mana instead. And, you know, before you had Wild Growth into Guff and Nourish at 5, which made a lot of sense numerically and in sequencing standpoints, but this just does so much it doesn't matter. Like, it's still gonna ramp you up to points you care about. It's still gonna be a really powerful play. You're not sacrificing too much tempo for a card like this one. You're getting so much in return. It's really hard to disagree. Widowbloom Seedsman seems good. It looked great in practice when I saw it. I think this is a totally fine choice for a number 1 pick. So now let's take a look at my picks. These are my personal top 10 picks for Castle Nathria, and you'll see some of the same cards, but also some new ones. And yeah, I'm covering Topior up here a little bit, but you guys know the Weed Dragon by now, hopefully. That said, I think there were some surprises here. Probably the first one that people are looking at is Elitist Snob. I still believe in this card. I think there was some initial hype, like, oh my god, it's a new Ziliax, and then that pulled back a little bit. But I actually think this is going to work really well in Paladin, because I don't think the other Paladin archetypes are really going to drive a lot this expansion. You know, I don't think Dude, for instance, is really going to make the cut. I think Paladin will revert back to hand buff stuff and Divine Shield stuff, and I think Elitist Snob plays really nicely into that. I think even in a mech package, you might still be able to run this as well. And when it is in that package getting hand buff, I think the card becomes completely bonkers. It's a really good swing tool in that Ziliax vein, but perhaps fits that deck even better. Magnetic, I guess, was pretty good in Mech Paladin, but you get the idea. It's still, I think, going to be a really powerful tool. So I'm still going to give the nod to Elitist Snob, despite perhaps being alone in that regard. We saw these 3 already, so I've also got Theatar Mad Duke up here. I think this card's just going to be played a lot. I think it's going to be a sort of new Mutanus in a lot of ways, and Mutanus just gets played a ton. So although it won't be as game-ending as something like Kael'thas, you know, it's not that kind of card. I think it'll be more commonly seen and sometimes more important as well as a combo disruption. For instance, stealing your opponent's Kael'thas will be possible. So I think Theatar deserves the spot there. I also think Topior is going to be really, really good in Druid. That one almost made the cut for the community ratings, I know, too. So it was well regarded by the community, just didn't quite make it into the top 10. But I think that's just going to drive some crazy swings in Druid. Plays really nicely into infused decks as well. Just kind of fits into the package without really asking a lot. It's self-sufficient in a lot of ways. It doesn't demand much because nature spells are so organic for Druid anyway. That's a bit of a pun. I also gave Sire Denathrius a high spot here. I think Denathrius proved to be a really good finisher many times in the Theory Crafting stream. This guy won a lot of games. The infused check is not hard, especially in something like Druid. It became a really powerful tool with like just 1 or 2 scales of Onyxia. Denathrius is a nutty win condition. Now, I will say, you know, I think only certain decks will be able to do that. I think, you know, Theory Crafting doesn't always present the best aggro competition. So sometimes, you know, an aggressive meta that's much faster will weed out Denathrius in some ways, because decks just won't have time to get to turn 10 for that swing. But he has that lifesteal that helps, so he is a bit of a stabilizer sometimes, even if he's not a game ender. I played him like that numerous times, where just healing 15 and clearing a board was sufficient to get me over the hump. And I think that still keeps Denathrius pretty relevant. I've got the Seedsman pretty high here myself, and then Impending Catastrophe at number 2. This card is just insane. The cards are off its nuts. It's not really just for imp decks. People are playing it in other decks as well. There are ways to play this with combo decks just to ensure you draw a ton of stuff. It makes Rod good again, potentially, which is kind of horrifying to think about. So this card's just too much card draw fuel to ignore. I think this is going to be nerfed or something. I don't know. It just seems completely nuts to me. And then at number 1, might be some questions there, but Prince Renathal, I kind of had to put him at number 1 because his data is insane. We've already seen it. He's proven himself. If you look right now, Prince Renathal is in almost 50% of decks with a win rate that's well north of 50% and comparable to other really popular meta-defining sorts of cards. Even at ranks like Diamond through Legends, still has a really nice net positive win rate and really strong if you go to lower ranks. Renathal is like actually kind of insane at lower ranks. So I just sort of had to respect the data in this case. I know there are still a lot of debates about Renathal. Is he worth it? Is he not? But so far the data suggests he is worth it, and I think he'll remain a pretty important card. I think people will play him a lot, so feel free to debate that, but I just kind of said, okay, there's already so much evidence that Renathal is insane. I kind of have to put him at number 1. Probably wasn't high on people's radars for community lists since he'd been out already, for the record, so don't judge too harshly there for folks if they missed him, but that was my logic. It's just like, it's already here. We see it. It's happening, so got to give him number 1. That said, curious to hear your thoughts. What do you think about my picks? What do you think about the community picks on this one? Some pretty crazy stuff here for sure. I want to know what you think. What are your top 10, so on and so forth? Share those thoughts in the comments below. I'm also going to take a look at the worst cards in the expansion as well to see what you guys think are going to be the worst and what I think are going to be the worst. I'll try to include some legendaries as well to make some bold claims, and then we can see how wrong we are in the future, which is always fun. So anyway, thanks so much for watching. Love you a ton. Share your thoughts below, and until next time, game on.